Have you ever wondered what secrets lie buried in a family's past? The voice, loud, sharp, and full of command, cracked like lightning through the drizzle. Maya's entire body flinched. She spun around with a startled gasp, clutching her daughter closer. Her breath caught on a sob that hadn't yet escaped. The single daisy in her hand trembled, rain streaming down its white petals just as it did her cheeks. Robert Langston stood a few feet away, glaring at her as if she'd trespassed on sacred ground. His tall frame was rigid beneath a charcoal overcoat. His silver hair damp from the rain. Eyes narrowed beneath a furrowed brow. The cane in his right hand wasn't for support. It was a symbol of authority. "I said, what the hell are you doing here?" he repeated, slower but colder. Maya swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Hold on, could this be the moment everything changes?" Her voice quivered when she spoke, barely more than a whisper. "Visiting Adrian." Robert's face hardened. "You have no right." I do," she stammered, straightening as best she could. "I'm not here to cause trouble." His eyes shifted downward toward the child clutching her leg. The little girl stared back at him with wide, curious, green eyes he hadn't seen in 3 years. His own breath caught. "Who is she?" he demanded. Maya's lips parted, and this time, her voice was steadier, if only by force of will. "Her name is Laya. She's Adrian's daughter." Robert stumbled back a step, gripping the top of his cane. "That's not true." "It is," Maya replied, her voice fragile, but firm. "You're lying." Maya looked down at her daughter, who now peeked out timidly from behind her coat. "Look at her," she said softly. "You know I'm not." Wait, what shocking truth will unravel next? The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. Rain dripped from the branches above, dotting the granite stone underfoot. Robert's eyes lingered on Laya's face. Her curls were soft, skin a warm brown, but those eyes, those unmistakable eyes. And as Maya and little Laya disappeared into the mist, leaving Robert alone with the weight of truth, we are reminded that love, real, unconditional love, cannot be controlled or denied. What would you have done in Robert's place? Tell us in the comments below. If this story moved you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, BUP Stories, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that family is not about power. It is about heart. "She's yours," Maya said. "And Adrian's." Robert's jaw clenched. Why didn't he say anything? Maya let out a shaky breath, then met his gaze. "Because he knew you wouldn't accept it. You controlled every part of his life, where he studied, who he met, what he became. You think you loved him, but what you loved was a version of him that fit your plan." "Don't talk about him like that," Robert barked. She stepped forward, her arms tightening around her daughter. "Then listen. He was miserable. He wanted to leave the company. He wanted to marry me. He was going to tell you, but he died before he could." "That's not true. Adrian would never." "You didn't know him." Maya's voice rose through the rain. "Not the man he was trying to become. Not the father he wanted to be." Robert's face paled. "Stop it. This is manipulation." "You're just trying to—" "I'm not asking for anything," Maya interrupted. "I've raised her alone. I've protected her. I've come here every month in the rain, in silence, while you hid behind your power and never once looked for the truth." He opened his mouth to retort, then closed it again. His eyes darted from Maya to Laya, then back. "I can provide for her," he said finally. "She deserves the Langston name, the life that comes with it." "She deserves love," Maya replied. "Not control." "She's my granddaughter, and I'm her mother," Maya said. "Steady now. And I won't let you do to her what you did to him." "I didn't do anything." "You never let him breathe, Robert." His face twisted in protest, but no words came. The air around them tightened. Laya, sensing the tension, tugged at her mother's coat. "Mama, who's that man?" she asked in a small voice. Maya turned, crouched low beside her. "That's your grandfather, baby." Robert stood motionless. The word grandfather echoed inside him like a hollow and haunting sound. Laya gave a small wave. Hey. Robert's lips parted. Hello, Laya. It was the first time he'd said her name aloud. Something inside him cracked, but he wouldn't show it. Not yet. We'll be leaving now, Maya said, her voice soft, but certain. She took Laya's hand, and together they walked away down the winding cemetery path into the gray mist and rustling leaves. Robert remained at the grave, unmoving, his cane sinking slightly into the soft earth. The rain blurred the stone and the world around him, but nothing could blur the truth now. He had a granddaughter, and he had a reckoning ahead. The rain had stopped by the time Maya reached the small walk-up apartment she and Laya shared on the south side of Albany. The neighborhood wasn't much, cracked sidewalks, old brick buildings worn by years, but it was safe, quiet, and held no ghosts. She shut the door behind them and knelt to help Laya out of her soaked boots. The girl's curls were damp, her cheeks flushed from the cold, but her spirit, as always, was bright. Was that really him? Laya asked, unzipping her coat. Maya hesitated. She reached for a towel to dry the girl's hair, avoiding her daughter's eyes for a moment. Yes, sweetheart. That was your grandfather. Laya frowned. He didn't smile. No, he didn't, Maya said softly, patting the little curls. But maybe one day he will. It was a lie she told herself, too. After putting Laya down for a nap, Maya sat alone at the kitchen table, the small heater humming in the corner. Her hands were wrapped around a chipped mug of tea that had long gone cold. Her gaze drifted toward the shoebox tucked on top of the pantry shelf. It had been sitting there for years, unopened, too full of memories. She stood, took it down, and opened it. Inside, a folded letter, an old photograph of Adrian holding their newborn daughter, and a flash drive labeled "For Dad." If I don't make it, her chest tightened as she ran her fingers over the words. She hadn't opened the drive. Not yet. Not even after the funeral. Back then, she still hoped Robert might come around, might look for answers, but he didn't. He buried Adrian in silence with a speech full of business accolades and family legacy and never once spoke her name. He hadn't just lost a son that day. He'd lost a future he didn't know existed. Maya remembered the beginning so vivid now. Adrian Langston had walked into the staff kitchen one afternoon and asked her for coffee. She'd rolled her eyes, figuring he was just another rich man bored with his father's empire. But he surprised her. He asked about her favorite books, her background, her thoughts on jazz. And not once did he treat her like she was invisible. Their connection had been instant, dangerous, and private. Maya knew the risks. Adrian didn't care. He was the only one in the Langston family willing to look past the walls money built. They had planned to leave. He had secured a job teaching at a community college in Boston. No boardrooms, no board votes, just me, you, and our daughter, he'd said, his hand resting on her pregnant belly. Maya remembered the way he smiled when Laya kicked. Then came the accident, the call at 2:17 a.m., the blank stares in the emergency room, the apology of a nurse who couldn't meet her eyes, and then nothing. No contact from Robert, no acknowledgement, not even a condolence. It was as if Maya and Laya had never existed until now. She pulled the photograph from the box and stared at it. Adrian looked so alive, beaming, proud, shirt wrinkled from the hospital bench he'd slept on. Laya, just hours old, resting on his chest. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it away and set the picture on the table, then finally reached for the flash drive. The laptop booted slowly, screen flickering before settling into a soft glow. Maya plugged the drive in, hands trembling. A single file appeared. Final message. Move. She hesitated, then clicked. The video opened with Adrian in a plain t-shirt, sitting on their old apartment's couch. His hair was messy, his eyes tired, but lit with purpose. "If you're watching this," he began, voice shaking slightly, "then I didn't get the chance to tell the truth." Maya's breath caught. "I have a daughter," he said. "Her name is Laya, and she's perfect. If this ever reaches my father, know this. She is your granddaughter, and she deserves better than silence. Adrian leaned forward. Dad, I know we didn't agree on much, but don't punish her for who I loved. Maya is stronger than you'll ever know. And if you care about legacy, let it start with her. He paused. I don't want my child to grow up thinking she was a mistake. The video ended. Maya closed the laptop, chest tight. That was Adrian, brave even in doubt, honest in the face of fear. He had tried to do the right thing, even when the world made it impossible. Now it was her turn. Later that evening, she sat across from her aunt, Helen, a retired civil rights lawyer with fierce eyes and a spine forged from decades of fighting injustice. The room smelled faintly of old paper and mint tea. He didn't threaten you, did he? Helen asked, sipping slowly. No, Maya replied. He was just stunned, angry. But I saw it. The second he looked at Laya, he knew. Helen leaned back. Then we prepare. I don't want a battle, Maya said. You might not have a choice, honey. Men like Robert Langston don't accept things. They claim them. Maya nodded. Then I'll fight for Adrian, for Laya, for every woman who's ever been erased. Helen smiled. Bittersweet. Good, because I've still got one good fight left in me. That night, after putting Laya to bed, Maya looked out the window toward the city lights. Somewhere, Robert Langston was probably sitting in a penthouse, trying to convince himself that the truth didn't matter. But it did, and Maya wasn't going away. Not this time. Tomorrow, the world would start asking questions, and Maya would be ready with answers. Robert Langston stood by the tall windows of his office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. The city pulsed below him like a living thing, cold steel, yellow lights, ceaseless ambition. But his mind was elsewhere, not on markets, nor mergers, nor the deal waiting on his desk. It was on her, on Maya, on the little girl with Adrian's eyes. He hadn't slept since that afternoon at the cemetery. Her voice, still shaking but full of quiet fire, haunted him. You didn't know him. She was wrong, he had told himself again and again. Adrian was his son, his legacy. But the more he repeated it, the hollower it sounded. You asked to see me, Mr. Langston. A voice broke his thoughts. It was Philip, his private legal advisor. Discreet, sharp, and utterly loyal. Yes, Robert said without turning around. I need to know everything about a woman named Maya Jenkins. Philip blinked. Should I be concerned? She claims her daughter is Adrian's. Philip didn't flinch. I'll begin with paternity verification. Do you want it discreet? Robert's jaw tightened. No media, no mess, just facts. Within 48 hours, Robert had a folder in hand. Maya Jenkins, age 29, former live-in housekeeper for the Langston estate, employed for 4 years. No criminal record. Resides in Albany. Single mother. The daughter, Laya, was born 4.5 years ago. The timeline aligned. Photos in the file were grainy, taken from a respectful distance, but undeniable. The eyes, the tilt of the chin, the stubborn line of her mouth. She was a Langston. Robert slammed the folder shut and stood. The decision was made. He would handle this the way he handled all crises, direct, firm, and final. By that weekend, Maya received a letter delivered not by post, but by a polished man in a dark car. She read it 3 times before calling Helen. They want a meeting, Maya said, phone pressed to her ear. In the city, Helen asked. Yes, private room, Midtown law firm. Do you want me there? I need you there. 2 days later, they entered the sleek glass-walled office together. Maya wore her best blouse, hair pulled back, eyes steady. Helen, in a pressed navy suit, walked like she'd never retired. Robert was already seated, alone, no lawyers flanking him, no entourage, just a glass of water at his elbow, and the weight of legacy on his shoulders. Miss Jenkins, he said, standing briefly. Maya, she replied. Miss Washington, he added to Helen. Helen nodded curtly. They sat. The silence stretched until Robert finally spoke. I've had time to reflect on Adrian, on what I missed. Maya said nothing. He cleared his throat. I won't deny it. I was blindsided. But now that I know, there are things I can offer: stability, opportunity, legacy. Laya shouldn't have to want for anything. Helen leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Langston? I'd like joint guardianship, shared custody. If Maya agrees, I can set up a trust fund, provide for her education, healthcare, travel, whatever she needs. Maya's fingers clenched in her lap. She looked at him, truly looked. All those things sound generous. But you never asked what she wants, what I want. Robert's expression flickered. I assumed that's always been the problem, Maya said. You assumed Adrian would follow your path. You assumed I was a threat. And now you assume money makes you worthy. I'm not trying to buy her, he said, though his voice betrayed him. Aren't you? Helen asked sharply. Or are you trying to control her the way you did Adrian? I did what I thought was best. You buried your son's voice long before you buried his body, Maya said. Her voice trembled, but her gaze did not. He wanted to teach, paint, raise his daughter in a quiet life. He died trying to leave your world behind. That's not fair, Robert murmured. Neither is losing your father at 4 years old, Maya said, standing slowly. Robert looked genuinely shaken. Please, I just want to be part of her life. Maya paused, heart pounding. Then you start by earning it. No lawyers, no press, no custody papers. You want to see her? You ask me. You show up like a man, not a corporation. Robert nodded slowly, swallowing the bitterness that rose in his throat. And if I do, then we'll talk again. As Maya turned to leave, Robert's voice followed her. She really does have his eyes. She didn't turn around. Yes, and I'll make sure she grows up seeing the world as he wanted her to. That night, Maya sat with Laya on the worn couch, reading a story about stars and ships and dreams. Mommy, will I see that man again? Maybe, Maya said softly. But not because he's rich. Only if he learns to be kind. Laya nodded, satisfied. Then she curled into her mother's side, eyes drifting closed. Maya looked at the moonlight, casting shadows on the wall. Somewhere in the city, Robert Langston sat alone, facing something he'd never had to confront before. Not power, not scandal, but the quiet, undeniable truth of love lost, and the long road to redemption ahead. Maya sat at the corner table of Helen's kitchen the next morning, stirring sugar into her coffee without tasting it. The early sun filtered in through lace curtains, catching on the steam rising from her mug. Helen stood at the sink, eyes flicking toward the clock. He'll make a move, Helen said finally. You poked the bear. Now he's awake. I didn't go there to provoke him, Maya replied. No, but you stood your ground. That scares men like Robert Langston more than any threat. Helen was right. By noon, it happened. A series of anonymous articles began surfacing online: slanted profiles, grainy images of Maya outside her building, speculation about her sudden reappearance in Robert Langston's life, headlines asking whether she had been seeking compensation or carrying secrets. It didn't take a genius to trace the leak back to a Langston affiliate media group. By evening, a local news van parked across the street from her apartment building. Maya sat frozen on the couch, Laya coloring quietly on the floor. She'd kept the child inside all day, curtains drawn. Her phone buzzed on the table. Another message from a number she didn't recognize. You see what he's doing? Helen said, walking in with the remote. This is the Langston playbook. Bury the truth under mud in headlines. I should have expected it, Maya murmured. But you didn't deserve it. Helen turned on the news. A talking head gestured beside a photo of Maya and Adrian taken years ago, probably from some long-deleted social post. Seen here during her time as a household employee, the anchor said with practiced detachment. The Langston family has made no official statement. Of course not, Helen muttered. He lets the machine do the talking. Maya stood abruptly. I'm not hiding. Not again. Helen looked at her. Then we go public on our terms. Maya hesitated, staring down at her daughter, put her in the middle of a storm. She's already in it, Helen said, but at least this way she'll see you steer through it. That night, Maya recorded a video. Simple, direct. She spoke from her living room, hair pulled back, wearing a plain sweater. My name is Maya Jenkins. I was Adrian Langston's partner, and I am the mother of his daughter, Laya. She didn't cry. Her voice wavered, but held. I didn't come forward to ask for anything. I didn't go to his grave for attention. I went because my daughter deserves to know where she came from. Because Adrian wanted to tell the world and never got the chance. She held up a photo of Adrian, smiling, holding newborn Laya. He loved her. He wrote letters. He made plans, but he was silenced by a system that told him he couldn't live freely or love freely. Her eyes met the lens. I won't let my daughter grow up erased. The video went live the next morning. Within hours, it had spread across social media. The tide shifted. Comments turned. Journalists began contacting her, not for scandal, but for truth. Civil rights groups picked it up. Adrian's college friends began sharing their memories, professors, former colleagues. Everyone had a story about a gentle, brilliant man who'd struggled beneath the weight of a name too heavy for his own dreams. Even some voices within Langston Corp began to murmur. But the empire didn't crumble easily. Robert sat at the head of a long table in his penthouse conference room, surrounded by board members. The screen on the wall froze on Maya's video. This is gaining traction, one man said, flipping through a folder. Our polling's down, public perception. I don't give a damn about perception, Robert snapped. I care about control. A woman across the table, silver hair, sharp glasses, spoke up. Control is what's slipping. Robert's hand clenched on the armrest. Perhaps it's time, another member added gently, to reach out differently. No lawyers, no media, just a conversation. Robert didn't respond. Instead, he stood, walked to the window, and looked out. The skyline blurred. That evening, he picked up the phone and called Maya. She didn't answer. He called again the next day. Still no answer. A letter arrived 2 days later. Formal, but brief. Mr. Langston, given the public harassment and media distortion originating from your associates, I no longer consider direct communication possible. You may direct all future inquiries through my legal counsel. Maya Jenkins. Robert read it 3 times, then set it down gently on the mahogany desk he'd once shared with Adrian. He had lost her. No, he had thrown her away, just like he'd done with his son. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel powerful. He felt old and irrelevant. Later that week, Maya stood outside a community center in Albany, speaking softly to a room of mothers and grandmothers, answering questions about resilience, about truth, about standing tall in the face of legacy. She asked me last night why her father isn't here, Maya said to the room, voice raw but strong. I told her because he loved her enough to dream of a life better than the one he was born into. And I will carry that dream for him. The room was silent. Then came soft applause, a tearful nod, the quiet hum of dignity restored. Outside, reporters waited, but Maya didn't run. She lifted Laya into her arms, whispered something that made the child smile, and walked through the noise with her head high. Because refusal wasn't weakness, it was survival. And in that survival was a quiet, burning justice, one that even Robert Langston couldn't rewrite. The wind off the Hudson carried a brittle chill, stirring the last of the golden leaves down the college courtyard. Maya sat on a worn wooden bench just outside the Fine Arts building of Hudson Valley State College. In her lap rested a yellow folder with Adrian's name scrolled across the front in his handwriting, a relic given to her only days ago by one of Adrian's former professors. She had returned to the campus out of desperation and hope, seeking answers, or maybe just a trace of Adrian outside the Langston name. Inside the folder were sketches, journal entries, and course notes. But most haunting of all was a partially drafted letter dated just 3 weeks before his death. Dear Professor Clean, I'm ready to leave the company for good. I've been offered a position in Boston. Maya and I want to raise Laya in peace. I'm terrified, but for the first time in years, I feel alive. Maya read the sentence again and again until her eyes stung. Footsteps approached. A voice followed. Miss Jenkins. She looked up. A man in his 60s, warm-eyed and sharply dressed in tweed, offered a tentative smile. I'm Ellis Clean. Adrian was one of my brightest. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. They shook hands. Maya nodded, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. I didn't know we had this job lined up, she said, voice soft. Ellis sat beside her. He was excited, nervous, determined. He was going to tell his father. But you probably know how that would have gone. Maya smiled faintly. I lived it. The professor looked out across the quad. He loved you. It was in everything he did. He said, you saw him, not the name, not the expectations, but him. That scared him more than anything. Maya's breath hitched. She hadn't expected this. A stranger who knew her love in ways she didn't. Ellis reached into his coat and handed her a small audio recorder. He asked me to record one of his portfolio reviews, said he wanted to share it with you one day. Maya took it gently. Thank you. When she played the recording later that night, Adrian's voice filled the room, confident, joyful. It was him, unfiltered, talking about art, students, a new mural idea for a children's library. There was laughter in his voice, something she hadn't heard in a long time. The world had tried to define Adrian Langston by stock options and board votes, but Maya was beginning to uncover the man he was meant to be. The next morning, a news story hit the press, not from gossip blogs, but the New York Tribune, an outlet known for rigorous journalism. The headline was simple. The Other Side of Langston, Voices from the Inside. The article chronicled interviews with former Langston Corporation employees, mostly black and brown staff, who spoke of subtle bias, isolation, and systemic silencing within the company culture. Most hadn't been brave enough to come forward until now. Maya's story had given them permission. One quote stood out. He told me I was lucky to have a job, never mind my degree. I wasn't there to think, just to execute. That's what Langston power feels like. The piece included photos, dates, and anonymous corroborations. It didn't accuse Robert Langston of criminal acts, but it painted a damning picture of a corporate kingdom built on control and silence. Maya read the article twice, her heart heavy with truth. She hadn't planned to start a movement, but something had been unleashed. That evening, she sat in Helen's living room with Laya asleep in the next room. The fireplace crackled softly. Do you think he's reading these articles? Maya asked. Helen sipped her tea. He's watching. Men like Robert don't look away. They calculate. Maya sighed. I didn't want war. I just wanted space. Helen gave her a long look. You're not in a war. You're in a reckoning. Meanwhile, in the upper floors of a Park Avenue tower, Robert Langston read the article in silence. Across from him sat his publicist, a woman named Julia, with a reputation for salvaging public disasters. You need to respond, Julia said. We can't ignore it anymore. Robert tossed the paper onto the table. What do you suggest? Denial, spin, or some human angle? He raised an eyebrow. You've built your empire on image, but right now your image is cracking. And whether you believe it or not, Adrian was trying to escape something. People see that now. Robert stood and walked to the window. Below, the city buzzed with lives he'd never bothered to know. In his reflection, he barely recognized himself. I gave him everything, he whispered. Julia stepped closer, but not freedom. Robert didn't respond. Back in Albany, Maya received an invitation not from Robert, but from the dean of Hudson Valley State College. They wanted to create a student art scholarship in Adrian's name. Maya hesitated. The name Langston still left a bitter taste, but she accepted. On the day of the announcement, she stood before a modest crowd of students and faculty. She held Laya's hand and looked out at the young faces full of promise. Adrian believed in second chances, she began. Not just for himself, but for everyone. This scholarship isn't about money. It's about letting people be more than what the world says they're allowed to be. The applause was quiet, heartfelt. Laya beamed. That night, Maya tucked her daughter into bed, then stood at the window. The city lights glowed beyond the glass. A storm was coming. She could feel it. The kind that didn't break windows, but exposed what was already cracked. She wasn't afraid because in the eye of that storm, she had something stronger than power. She had truth and love, and those were the foundations that would not fall. The first snow of the season dusted the streets of Albany in quiet silver. Maya stood outside Laya's school, scarf pulled tight against her chin, waiting among a row of parents as the children poured out in coats and mittens. Laya came bounding down the steps, her cheeks pink with cold, backpack swinging. She flung her arms around Maya's waist. I drew a snowflake that looks like Daddy's eyes, she declared proudly, holding up a crinkled piece of paper. Maya smiled, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. I'm sure it's beautiful. The joy in her daughter's voice steadied her, but her heart was far from peaceful. That morning, her attorney had called with news. Robert Langston had filed for partial custody. It wasn't a surprise. The moment Maya's video had gone viral and the public tide turned, she knew the truce was temporary. Still, seeing the legal motion in writing, signed, notarized, polished with the cold precision of corporate law, hit her like a blow to the ribs. He hadn't even called. Helen was furious. He's not trying to be a grandfather. He's trying to reassert dominance. They now faced the very thing Maya had tried to avoid: courtrooms, depositions, the dissecting of her motherhood by strangers in robes and suits. Maya took Laya home, fed her dinner, read her a bedtime story, and waited until the little girl was asleep before pacing the kitchen. The walls, once warm and familiar, now felt too narrow, like they were closing in. There was a knock at the door. Helen entered without a word, setting her briefcase on the counter. I spoke to the judge assigned to the case, she said. And? Maya asked, trying to keep her voice even. She's old school, believes in family reconciliation. That could work in our favor or against it. If Robert presents himself as the stable, loving grandfather, and you as the woman who denied him access, the court could lean toward compromise. Maya gritted her teeth. He's not stable. He's just relentless. Helen nodded. We need more than emotion. We need proof of what? Of Adrian's wishes. Of the environment Laya's been raised in, and of Robert's pattern of control. Maya reached for the folder she had brought back from the college. I have something. They sat together at the table, sifting through the letters, the recorded message Adrian had left, and the article from the Tribune. Helen marked items, drafted notes, and made copies. At one point, she looked up. There's something else we should consider. What? A public hearing? Make the case visible. Force his hand. Maya hesitated. You mean expose him? Helen leaned in. No, reveal you. Let the world see a mother fighting not for money, not for fame, but for her child's soul. The next morning, Maya received an unexpected invitation. A meeting face-to-face requested by Robert. Against her instincts, she agreed. They met in a quiet chapel on the outskirts of the city. Robert arrived in a black coat, alone, carrying nothing but a folded handkerchief in his hand. Maya stood at the back pew, arms crossed. He approached slowly. Thank you for coming, he said. I didn't come for pleasantries. I assume you've read the petition. Yes, I'm not trying to take her from you, he said, voice low. But I want to be part of her life. You had a chance to do that the honest way. You chose court documents and headlines. He panicked. No, Maya said firmly. You controlled like you always have. Adrian tried to escape that. Now you're repeating it with his daughter. Robert sat, his expression tired. I was afraid. Afraid she'd grow up thinking I didn't care. She would have grown up knowing the truth. That you refused to bend. They sat in silence for a long moment. The stained glass windows threw fractured light onto the floor. Robert finally spoke again. What do you want? I want you to drop the petition. His jaw tightened. I want you to show up as her grandfather, not her owner. I want visits on her terms. I want your support without your interference. He looked at her. And if I agree, we build something real. Something Adrian would have been proud of. And if I don't, Maya stood. Then I fight. And this time it won't just be headlines. It'll be history. As she turned to leave, Robert's voice followed. I lost my son. I don't want to lose her, too. Maya paused at the door, then prove it. Not with papers, with presence. Back at home, she held Laya a little longer than usual. The girl rested her head against Maya's chest, murmuring about snowflakes and stars. Maya closed her eyes. The storm was still circling, but something inside her had changed. She was no longer bracing for the blow. She was moving through it, and every step was for the little girl who carried Adrian's eyes and her own fierce heart. It was early spring when the Langston name returned to the headlines. This time, not for scandal, but for silence. The custody petition had been withdrawn. No press conference followed. No official statement issued, just a quiet retraction filed by Robert's attorneys and stamped by the court with all the cold efficiency Maya had come to expect from his world. But she didn't breathe a sigh of relief. Not yet. She stood outside Laya's dance class, watching through the wide studio windows as her daughter twirled in pink socks and a too-large leotard. Maya's phone buzzed in her coat pocket. It was Helen. It's done, Helen said, straight to the point. I saw the update. He backed off. For now, Maya nodded slowly. He didn't do it out of grace. No, Helen said, but you left him no other choice. He's not used to losing, Maya. That kind of man doesn't forget it. That evening after Laya was asleep, Maya made a decision. She wrote Robert a letter, handwritten, nothing formal, just truth. Robert, I saw the petition was dropped. I want to believe that means something, but I need more than silence. Laya is growing fast. She asks about Adrian every day, and now she's starting to ask about you. If you want a place in her life, it starts with showing up as yourself. No lawyers, no press, just as her grandfather. Let's set new terms. Not for control, for connection. Maya. She sent it by courier, unsure if he'd even read it. The response came 3 days later, not in writing, but in presence. Robert arrived at the community center where Maya volunteered twice a week. She was helping organize a spring donation drive when she saw him standing awkwardly near the back, hands folded, eyes scanning the room. He looked out of place in his tailored overcoat and polished shoes, but his expression was quiet. Humbled maybe. Maya approached slowly. You read the letter, she said. He nodded. I did, and I'm here, he said simply. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Maya handed him a box of canned goods. If you want to help, we need everything sorted by expiration date. He took the box without protest and followed her to the back table. For the next hour, they worked side by side, barely speaking. Maya watched him from the corner of her eye. He didn't complain, didn't command. He just did what was asked. Afterward, as the volunteers began to leave, Robert lingered. He turned to her. I want to meet her again. This time properly, Maya studied his face. It was worn but not guarded. Okay, she said after a long pause. 1 hour at the park near my place. Just you and her. I'll be nearby. He nodded. Thank you. The following Saturday, Robert sat on a park bench, a book in his lap and a paper bag beside him. Laya approached cautiously, her mittened hands buried in her jacket pockets. Hi, Laya said, standing a few feet away. Robert looked up, his voice caught slightly. Hi, Laya. You remember my name? I could never forget it. She looked down at the ground. Are you really my dad's dad? I am. Do you miss him? Robert closed the book and set it aside. Every single day. Laya hesitated, then climbed onto the bench beside him. Mom says he liked books. He did, Robert said softly. And jazz and strawberry ice cream. Me too, Laya whispered. Robert opened the paper bag and pulled out 2 small cones, slightly melted. Your mom said this was your favorite. Laya giggled and took one. They sat in silence, eating ice cream as spring buds swayed on tree branches above them. Maya watched from a distance, heart full of ache and awe. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something else, a beginning. Later that day, Robert walked Maya back to her apartment. At the steps, he paused. She's remarkable, he said. She's her father's daughter. He hesitated. I'm sorry. Maya's breath caught. I was wrong, he said. About you? About him? About all of it. She looked at him, eyes weary but open. I can't erase what I did, he continued. But I'd like to try to be part of this on your terms. Maya nodded slowly. We'll take it one step at a time. Fair. He turned to leave, then stopped. Adrian, he would have been proud of you. Of her. Maya smiled, soft and tired. I hope so. That night, as Laya slept curled against her favorite stuffed bear, Maya stood by the window, watching the streetlights glow. Outside, the city was quiet. Inside, something had shifted. It wasn't peace. Not fully, but it was possible now. And for the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a path, uncertain, maybe, but walked together. The air in the Langston Foundation Gallery was warm and hushed, filled with the faint scent of polished wood and the distant murmur of footsteps. Maya stood near a large canvas, Adrian's final piece, unfinished, but breathtaking. Bold strokes of deep blue collided with hopeful streaks of white. It was a painting that felt like a storm breaking open to reveal light. The gallery had contacted her weeks ago, asking permission to include Adrian's work in a new exhibit titled Unfinished Voices. It featured artists whose lives were cut short, but left behind pieces that still spoke loudly. Maya had hesitated, unsure whether to share something so personal with the public. But in the end, she had said yes. Adrian would have wanted people to see the man he was becoming. Not the businessman, not the Langston heir, but the artist, the father, the dreamer. Now, the gallery was filled with quiet admirers, many of them unaware of who she was. Maya moved through the space alone, hands clasped, her emotions kept carefully below the surface until she saw Robert. He stood in front of the painting with Laya beside him. She held his hand, speaking animatedly, her eyes lit with wonder. Robert knelt beside her, pointing to the corner of the canvas where Adrian had scrolled a small, nearly invisible signature. He always signed in lowercase, Robert was saying. It made the art feel more human. Maya approached quietly. Laya turned first, her face lighting up. Mommy, Grandpa says Daddy liked to paint at night. Maya smiled. He did, said the world was quieter then, easier to hear what the colors were trying to say. Robert stood slowly. He didn't speak, just looked at the painting, then at her. There was something in his eyes Maya hadn't seen before. Not guilt, not pride, just humility. Thank you, he said quietly, for sharing this. It wasn't easy, Maya admitted. He looked around the gallery. None of this is. They fell into a quiet pause. Then Maya nodded toward the painting. He painted this after Laya was born. Said she made him believe in light again. Robert's eyes clouded. I didn't see it back then. I thought he was just distracted, losing focus. He wasn't losing anything, Maya said gently. He was finding himself. Laya tugged at Robert's hand. Can we get ice cream after this? He smiled. Of course. Maya hesitated. Mind if I come? Laya, yes, family ice cream day. Robert looked at Maya, surprised. Then he nodded. I'd like that. They walked out of the gallery together, a strange trio of past, present, and possibility. On the way to the ice cream shop, Laya chattered about school, dance class, and her latest drawing project. Robert listened attentively, asking questions, laughing quietly. It was awkward at first, but it wasn't painful. Later, seated at a booth with melting cones and sticky napkins, Maya noticed something unexpected: calmness. Robert didn't dominate the conversation. He didn't issue opinions as facts. He simply was there, present. And when Laya leaned her head against his arm, he looked as though he might cry. After dropping Laya off at a friend's for a sleepover, Maya and Robert walked back to her apartment building in silence. As they reached the front steps, he turned to her. "There's something I want to ask," he said. Maya crossed her arms, bracing herself. "Okay. I want to start a foundation," he said. "In Adrian's name, not under the Langston brand, independent, funded by me, but directed by you." Maya blinked. "Me?" "You knew him best," Robert said. "And you've spent years doing this kind of work, supporting mothers, artists, kids who don't get second chances." "It's what he would have wanted." Maya didn't respond right away. The offer hung in the air between them like a fragile truce. "I don't want control," Robert added quickly. "I want to contribute. Quietly, if you'll let me." Maya looked up at the sky where stars blinked through city haze. "Why now?" she asked. "Because I missed my son's life," Robert said, his voice gravelly. "But I don't want to miss the legacy he left behind." She studied his face, creased, weathered, unfamiliar, yet slowly becoming known again. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded. "That's all I ask." She turned toward the door, then paused. "Robert." He looked back. "Thank you for showing up." He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I'm learning. A little late, but I'm learning." That night, Maya lay in bed. The window cracked open to the spring air. She thought of Adrian, of the way he used to hold her hand when he was nervous, of the whispered dreams in the dark. She imagined what he would say if he could see them now. Maybe he'd laugh. Maybe he'd cry. But one thing was certain. He would have been proud. Not just of Laya, not just of her, but maybe even of his father. And that thought, fragile as it was, held Maya long into the night. A possibility she hadn't believed in before. A future quietly rewriting itself. One honest step at a time. The first check for the Adrian Langston Foundation arrived in a plain envelope with no logo, no return address, just Robert's neat handwriting on the front. Inside was a personal note for the future he never got to finish. "Let's build it together." Quietly but deliberately, Maya sat at her kitchen table, staring at it, the paper soft between her fingers. Outside, the morning light filtered through lace curtains, warming the edge of the envelope. It wasn't just the money. It was the gesture. Clean, unbranded. No press, no ceremony, just him learning to show up without fanfare. The foundation had begun as a whisper of a few conversations between Maya, Helen, and a couple of community leaders. But now it was real. They had rented a modest office above a bookstore downtown. And Maya had already begun hiring a small staff, a program coordinator, a caseworker, and a part-time accountant. The mission was simple but profound. Provide resources for young artists of color and single-parent families navigating systemic barriers. Adrian's photo sat framed on the desk in the corner. Not the corporate headshot from business magazines, but the one Maya had taken of him in their old kitchen. Sleeves rolled up, flour on his cheek, laughing as he tried to teach her how to make pancakes. That's who she was fighting for. Robert visited once a week, never unannounced, never overstepping. He'd offer advice when asked, sit quietly in meetings, or bring Laya lunch after school. Sometimes he would just stand in front of Adrian's photo, his face unreadable. One afternoon, as Maya finalized paperwork for a local grant, Helen entered the office with a concerned look. You have a visitor, she said. Who? A reporter? Maya stiffened. I didn't schedule any interviews. She says she's not here to dig, just to listen. Maya considered for a long moment. Send her in. The woman was young, early 30s, with a notebook in one hand and tired eyes that suggested she'd been chasing stories for too long. She introduced herself as Dana Lopez, an independent journalist. I know the headlines, Dana began. But what's been happening behind them? That's the story I want to tell. I'm not looking to revive the drama, Maya said evenly. I'm not either, Dana replied. But the truth, you've lived through it, matters to people who don't have your voice or your courage. That disarmed Maya. They spoke for over an hour. Maya told her about Adrian, not as a scandal, but as a man, about his dreams, his laughter, the way he used to hum when painting. She talked about the foundation, about Laya, about grace and anger, and how long it had taken to hold both in the same breath. Dana took notes in silence, only occasionally interjecting with a soft, thank you. Before leaving, she said, you didn't just survive this story. You reshaped it. The next week, the article was published online. Building from Ashes, the woman behind the Adrian Langston Foundation. It was quiet, thoughtful, and beautifully written. There were no clickbait titles, no salacious details, just Maya's voice woven through each paragraph. Robert was mentioned only once, described as a man learning how to show up. Maya received dozens of emails in the following day. Single mothers from other cities, young artists, community leaders offering support or sharing their own stories of navigating generational pressure and grief. For the first time, Maya felt something larger than resolution. She felt movement. Meanwhile, Robert continued to evolve in his own quiet way. One evening, he invited Maya and Laya to dinner, not at a restaurant, but at his apartment. It was the first time Maya had seen the inside of his world beyond a boardroom. To her surprise, the place was modest, clean lines, cool tones, but no personal warmth, no photos, no laughter caught in corners. It looked like a life paused, not lived. Dinner was simpler: roast chicken, vegetables, and mashed potatoes. He confessed that his housekeeper had helped prepare most of it, but the effort was still his. Laya chattered the whole time, telling him about her school project on Harriet Tubman and asking why grown-ups always use too many forks. After dessert, while Laya colored at the coffee table, Maya and Robert sat on the couch. I read the article, he said. She waited for a reaction. I think it was fair, he said at last. Maya nodded. You're in it briefly. I know. I don't mind. Honestly, it was the first time I saw myself, not as I wish to be seen, but as I probably am. That's not an easy thing to face. No, he said, but necessary. A beat passed. I found a letter, Robert said suddenly. In Adrian's things, I never opened it. I didn't even know he'd written it to me until recently. Maya looked at him, heart-catching. Do you want to read it? He asked. She nodded. He reached into a side drawer and pulled out a small envelope. His hand shook slightly as he handed it to her. She opened it slowly, the paper soft with age. Dad, I don't know if this will reach you in time or if you'll even read it, but I need to say it anyway. I'm leaving, not to escape you, but to find myself. I love Maya. I love our daughter. I want to be the kind of man they deserve. Not perfect, just honest. I hope one day you can be proud of that. Not as a Langston. Just as a father, Adrian. Tears welled in Maya's eyes. Robert turned his face away, jaw trembling. I should have read it sooner, he whispered. You're reading it now, she said gently. Laya looked up from her coloring. Mommy, Grandpa, are you sad? Maya smiled and wiped her cheek. No, baby. We're just remembering someone we love very much. Robert reached for Laya's hand and held it. Maya folded the letter and tucked it back into the envelope. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. But in that moment, in that quiet room filled with loss and light, she realized something powerful. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It unfolds slowly, like spring. And sometimes it begins with the simple act of reading the words that should have been heard long ago. The new headquarters of the Adrian Langston Foundation was nothing grand, just a restored brick building on the east side of Albany. Its tall windows framed by hanging flower baskets and a freshly painted blue door. But to Maya, it felt like a cathedral, a place where stories could be told, dreams supported, and voices once dismissed amplified. Opening day had arrived. Sunlight poured over the community mural painted along the side of the building, a swirling blend of images, a child with outstretched hands, a rising sun, and at the center, a silhouette unmistakably inspired by Adrian, brush in hand, gaze fixed upward. Students from the local art program had painted it in his memory, and Maya had cried quietly the night it was completed. Inside, volunteers moved in rhythm, setting up chairs, sound equipment, and refreshments. Helen walked the floor with her usual efficiency, clipboard in hand, issuing quiet commands. Robert arrived early, dressed not in a tailored suit, but in a navy sweater and slacks, carrying a box of printed programs. Maya met him at the door. "You came early," she said with a small smile. "I figured I owed you at least a few folding chairs worth of work," he replied. She laughed softly and took the box from his hands. As they worked side by side, the hum of preparations surrounded them. Laya flitted in and out, playing unofficial hostess in her yellow dress, making introductions with the pride of someone who owned the building. By noon, the room was filled. Local officials, educators, artists, single mothers, and curious neighbors filled the folding chairs. Some had followed Maya's journey through the articles and social media posts. Others had been quietly helped by her work long before any foundation existed. All had come to witness this new beginning. The podium stood near the front, flanked by Adrian's portrait on one side and the foundation's banner on the other. Maya took a deep breath and stepped up. She looked out at the crowd. Faces of every age and background met her gaze, but her eyes lingered on the front row. Laya, feet barely touching the floor. Helen, arms folded with quiet pride. And Robert sitting still with his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Thank you all for being here," Maya began, her voice steady. "This isn't just a ribbon cutting. It's a legacy reborn." She paused, her eyes finding the mural outside the nearest window. Adrian wasn't a headline. He wasn't a name on a boardroom plaque. He was a man who wanted to live out loud, to create, to love, to father without fear. A hush settled over the room. "This foundation isn't just about preserving his memory," Maya continued. "It's about giving others the freedom he barely tasted. It's about choice, dignity, and the quiet power of being seen." She stepped back, inviting others to speak. Local youth who had benefited from pilot programs, a young artist whose first gallery showing had been sponsored by Maya's efforts, a mother who had received emergency housing through the foundation's early partnerships. The testimonies were raw, real, and powerful. Robert watched them all, hands unmoving, face unreadable. When a teenage boy named Jamal took the podium and shared how he once sat in a jail cell, thinking his story was over until Maya showed him otherwise, Robert blinked hard and looked down at his shoes. After the final speaker stepped down, Maya returned to the microphone. "We don't undo grief," she said softly. "We build with it. That's what this is." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a bronze key on a simple string. This key belonged to Adrian. It opened the studio door in our first apartment. He said it was his reminder that he always had the power to create something new. She placed the key in a small shadow box and hung it on the wall beside the front entrance. "Let this be our reminder, too." Applause rose, hesitated first, then fuller, warmer, like waves reaching a shore. After the event, people mingled. Maya moved through the crowd, accepting embraces and congratulations. Robert stood off to the side, sipping weak coffee from a paper cup. He didn't approach Maya until most had left. "That was extraordinary," he said. "She would have made him proud," Maya replied, nodding toward Laya, now napping on Helen's shoulder in the corner. "So would you." There was a long pause. "Can I show you something?" he asked. Maya hesitated, then nodded. He led her upstairs to a small office space the board had set aside for visiting guests and donors. On the wall was a framed item, simple, elegant. Inside it was the letter Adrian had written, the one Robert had found and shared with Maya weeks ago. Maya stepped closer, reading it again. Below it in smaller print was an inscription, for the fathers who learn late and the sons who loved early. Maya turned to him, eyes shimmering. You had this made, he nodded. It felt right. They stood there in silence for a moment, past and present coexisting in a rare truce. When Maya finally spoke, her voice was gentle. You're doing the work, Robert, and that matters. He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. I just wish I'd started sooner. We all do, she said. But starting now is what counts. As the sun dipped behind the buildings and the foundation's hallway lights flickered on, Maya looked around at what they had created, a space for healing, for dreaming, for beginning again. And as she descended the stairs to gather her daughter and lock up for the night, she knew this was not an ending. It was a doorway, and the key now belonged to everyone willing to walk through. Spring faded into early summer, and with it came both warmth and unrest. The Adrian Langston Foundation was thriving, applications pouring in, partnerships blooming, and Laya's artwork gracing nearly every hallway. But Maya sensed tension simmering beneath the surface. Like the stillness before a thunderstorm, it began with a phone call. Helen answered first, her tone shifting from polite to grim within seconds. She handed the receiver to Maya with a look that said, "Brace yourself." "It's Dana," said the voice on the other end. "I think you should see this." Maya met the journalist the next day at a cafe tucked into a Brooklyn alley. Dana slid a folder across the table. Inside were emails, memos, and internal reports leaked from Langston Corporation. They came from a whistleblower, Dana said. Anonymous for now, but everything's timestamped, verified. Maya scanned the pages. She saw her name, Adrian's, even Laya's. They monitored your communications while you were still living with Adrian, Dana explained quietly. Keystroke trackers, surveillance software. Robert didn't just disapprove of your relationship, he treated you like a threat. Maya's breath caught. They had an entire file on you, Dana continued. Race, income history, even your medical records. Maya closed the folder, hands trembling. Why now? Because the foundation is succeeding. You're changing lives, and someone inside the old regime can't live with the truth being buried anymore. That evening, Maya sat alone in her living room. The documents spread before her like a battlefield. Laya was with Helen for the weekend, giving Maya space to process. The betrayal hit deeper than she expected, not because she hadn't guessed at Robert's reach, but because she had started to believe he was changing. She didn't sleep. The next morning, she showed up at Robert's apartment unannounced. The doorman, recognizing her, waved her through. Robert answered the door, surprised but not unkind. Maya. She walked past him into the foyer. I need to talk, and I need you to listen. He followed her into the living room. Sensing the weight in her voice, she laid the folder on the table. He opened it slowly. As he read, his expression shifted, confusion, then disbelief, and finally an old familiar mask. Defensiveness. This wasn't me, he said quickly. Not directly, but it came from your office, Maya replied. Under your leadership, your direction. I didn't know it went that far. You authorized the risk assessments. You pushed for background checks. You said I was a liability. Her voice cracked. I was the woman your son loved. He looked at her, guilt creeping into his features. I was trying to protect him, from what? A woman with a child and a backbone? From a life he chose freely? Robert sat down heavily. I didn't understand then. I was afraid. Afraid of what? She asked. Love that didn't look like yours? A legacy you couldn't control? He looked away. I've forgiven a lot, she said, quieter now. But this isn't about mistakes. It's about a belief system that sees people like me as expendable, dangerous, unworthy. He didn't deny it. Couldn't. Maya stood, voice shaking. If you want to be part of Laya's life, if you want to keep walking this path, we start over. And this time, you don't just show up, you tell the truth. Robert looked up, eyes reeling. What do you want me to do? She handed him a draft, a statement. Public, transparent. You don't name names. You name the system, the culture. You say what needs to be said. And if I don't, she held his gaze. Then the foundation parts ways with your funding. And I take this story to every corner of the country that needs to hear it. Silence hung between them. Then slowly, Robert reached for the paper. He read it once, then again, and finally he said, I'll do it. The statement went live 2 days later. It was short, measured, but powerful. In building a legacy, I lost sight of humanity. In protecting my empire, I harmed those I claimed to love. My son's memory deserves more than silence. And so does the woman who carries it forward. The response was immediate. Some praised the honesty. Others called it performative. But Maya didn't care about the noise. She cared about the message and the movement it ignited. That week, enrollment at the foundation doubled. New sponsors reached out. Universities sent letters of collaboration. Young artists from across the country submitted portfolios. A mother from Detroit wrote, I didn't think people like us mattered to men like him, but now maybe we do. Robert, for his part, remained quiet. He didn't seek applause. He simply kept showing up at staff meetings, at Laya's dance recital, and sometimes at Maya's door with nothing more than a cup of coffee and a question, how can I help today? One night after a particularly full day at the foundation, Maya tucked Laya into bed. The little girl yawned, her eyes heavy. Mommy, she whispered. Why do people change? Maya kissed her forehead. Because sometimes love teaches us how. She turned off the light and stood in the doorway, watching her daughter drift into sleep. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. But inside, there was only peace and a quiet promise carried in Maya's heart. The reckoning had come, and they had survived it with truth intact. The autumn breeze carried a quiet chill through the city, the leaves outside the foundation building curling into amber and gold. Maya stood by the window of her office, sipping coffee as she watched children play across the street. Their laughter floated up like music, innocent, untamed, full of life. It had been exactly 1 year since the foundation's official launch. 12 months of building, navigating, forgiving. 12 months of growth, not just in funding or outreach, but in healing, in trust, in the delicate act of reimagining what legacy could mean. The morning staff meeting was already underway. Helen handed out printed reports as Maya stepped into the room. Her presence met with warm smiles and nods of respect. She had become more than a founder. She was a steady presence, a compass. End-of-year gala prep is on track, Helen said, pointing to the checklist. We've confirmed the venue, the guest list finalized, and Roberts agreed to speak. Maya raised an eyebrow. He did. Helen smirked. He insisted. The announcement came as a surprise. Robert had kept a low profile since his public statement. His donations continued, quiet and consistent. He attended board meetings and stayed involved in programming decisions, but he had never spoken publicly since. Maybe this was his way of closing the loop. That evening, Maya found herself walking the old route near the university campus, past the art buildings, the park where Adrian used to sketch, the bench where he first told her he wanted to be a father. She sat there now, alone, watching shadows stretch across the sidewalk. A voice interrupted her thoughts. Didn't think I'd find you here. She turned to see Robert, coat open, holding 2 cups of coffee. She accepted the one he offered and gestured to the bench. It's where he always felt closest. Robert sat beside her. For a while, neither spoke. They just listened to the rustling leaves, the occasional honk of traffic, the rhythm of their own shared silence. Finally, Robert said, the speech, I wrote it 3 times, then I threw all of it out. Maya chuckled. That sounds like him. I don't want to talk about myself that night or even him really. I want to talk about her. Laya, he nodded, about what it means to be given a second chance to love someone right, to protect without controlling, to support without erasing. Maya looked at him, her eyes soft. That's a good speech. I'm still working on the ending. She sipped her coffee. You'll know it when it comes. The gala arrived under strings of lights and soft jazz, held in the community center turned event space that the foundation had helped restore. Guests arrived in waves, donors, artists, families touched by the foundation's programs, and neighbors who'd come just to support. Laya wore a silver dress and white boots, her curls tucked into a headband. She clung to Maya's hand until Robert offered his, and to everyone's surprise, she took it. Together, they walked into the room as a family, unconventional, imperfect, but whole. When the time came for speeches, Maya spoke first. She thanked the crowd, honored the staff, and spoke of Adrian not as a tragedy, but as a catalyst. She told the story of a man who dared to live differently, who chose art over wealth, love over legacy, humanity over heritage. Then it was Robert's turn. He stepped onto the stage, cleared his throat, and faced the crowd. I used to think legacy was about power, he began. Buildings, companies, names etched in stone. He paused, searching the faces before him. But I was wrong. Legacy is what you leave in people. The memory of how you made them feel. The opportunities you gave or denied. The love you showed or withheld. He glanced toward Maya and Laya. I failed my son. I tried to control him, shape him, steer him toward a future I thought was right. I see now that I only pushed him further from it. The room was silent, but he left behind something greater than my name. He left behind a child and a woman who turned grief into action, into hope. He reached into his coat pocket and held up a small object, a key on a string. This belonged to Adrian. It opened the door to his first studio. Maya hung it in the foundation's entrance where it now welcomes everyone who walks through those doors. He placed it gently on the podium. It's a reminder that no matter how locked away we think healing is, there's always a key. And sometimes it's held by the person we once hurt the most. The crowd rose in applause. Later that night, as guests slowly filtered out, and the last trays of food were cleared, Maya stepped outside for air. The stars blinked overhead, cool and steady. Robert joined her, silent at first. You found your ending, she said. He nodded. Turns out it wasn't about me. She looked toward the street where Laya danced on the sidewalk, spinning beneath a lamp post. It never was. They stood together, not as enemies, not even as former in-laws, but as guardians of something more powerful than blood or business, of truth, of redemption, of a little girl who reminded them both that love was worth rebuilding brick by painful, beautiful brick. Maya reached into her coat, pulled out a folded letter, and handed it to Robert. He opened it. It was from Adrian. If you're reading this, Dad, maybe it means we found peace. Or maybe Maya just finally convinced you to stop talking long enough to listen. Either way, I hope you know now love isn't weakness. It's strength. And legacy isn't control. It's what you leave behind when you finally let go. Robert's hands shook. Maya looked at him, voice gentle. He left this for both of us. They stood beneath the lamplight, the city moving slowly around them. And for the first time in a long time, there was no pain in the silence, only peace. The circle had closed. Not perfectly, but honestly, and that at last was enough. The story teaches us that healing is not about forgetting the past, but facing it with courage, humility, and truth. It reminds us that love, when grounded in honesty and compassion, can rebuild even the most broken relationships. True legacy isn't measured by wealth or reputation, but by the lives we touch, the voices we uplift, and the courage to admit when we've been wrong. Through Maya, Robert, and Laya's journey, we learn that redemption is possible when we choose empathy over ego. And that sometimes the most powerful transformation begins with simply showing. Subscribe to BUP Stories for more inspiring tales like this.